They say you can outlast anything up here if you learn when to move and when to go still. Summer teaches you to float. The sun's a pale coin that never quite drops. The water loosens its grip, and the days slur together until sleep is a trick you play on yourself. Winter teaches you the opposite. The black days come and you learn to breathe shallow, to count your steps, to recognize the shape of fear under a parka. You learn that the world survives by choosing what it refuses to look at. I moved to Eagle's Rest because I was tired of towns that pretended they weren't dying. The map called it a village, but it was 12 houses stitched along a river that ran fat and mean out of the mountains, and a bar with a single neon letter still working. AR. If you came in from the airstrip, the first thing you saw wasn't the houses or the boats or the satellite dishes. It was the manor on the blue-black ridge, set above the timberline like something a glacier forgot to carry off. Winter bent around it the way a river bends around a rock. It used to be a mine office, Elsie told me the first night. Elsie ran the bar and the post office and half the rumors. Then it wasn't. Now it's his. His? I asked, chewing the ends off words that already felt too warm for this place. She didn't look up from drying the glass. The man who owns it. The Count. I laughed because the word sounded like a storybook forgotten on a radiator. A count. In Alaska. We had Russians, Elsie said. We had gold. And we had men who wanted to wake up the next day, no matter what it cost. She set the glass down as if the conversation were done. You'll hear more. You'll decide what to believe. I didn't go to Eagle's Rest for stories. I came to run freight up the river and pretend that the distance between me and the life I had abandoned could be measured in miles. But stories here behaved like weather. They arrived, settled, and if you were wise, you learned how to work in them. The first time I saw him was a week before the black days bit all the way down. He came into the bar with the clean, quiet of someone who isn't used to, doorways refusing him, tall but not in a way that made space, pale in a world where everyone wore the same windburn, dressed like he'd picked each layer for function and then forgotten it was supposed to look like anything. He nodded to Elsie, who didn't nod back. What'll it be? She asked, and he smiled like an old photograph of a smile. Water, he said. His voice had a sanded-down quality, as if he'd practiced the shapes in private for a long time. No one else spoke. The generator hummed. Outside, the wind drug its nails across the river. He didn't look at anyone but the glass. What's your name? I asked, because silence felt like permission he hadn't earned. He lifted his eyes, and I had the sense of being counted, not dismissed or weighed, but placed. Warren, he said after a beat. Mr. Warren will do. That your first name or last? It's the one I'm using, he said, and there was a ripple along the bar stools, a shift of coats, a cough that wasn't about lungs. He'd paid with a bill so crisp, it could have cut the lip off a pint glass and left without finishing the water. Why do you call him a count? I asked Elsie when the door had shut out the wind and him both. Because he was one, she said, and it would have been easy to laugh again if the light over the bar hadn't flickered in a way that made the room briefly honest. Later, when I was attaching chains to a drum of diesel and swearing at my gloves, Cal stopped to watch without offering help. which counted as politeness here. Cal was tall in a way that built space around him. He worked traps in winter, fish in summer, and stories the rest of the time. "You talk to him," he said. "Not much to talk about. He drinks water." Cal spat into the snow where the dark spread like a bruise. "He's older than he looks. That's what they all say." They turned out to be everyone older than the mountains, which is to say, everyone who'd lived through at least one winter in Eagle's Rest. The story went like this. A long time ago, some people said when the United States had just purchased Alaska for a deal that sounded like a glass ornament rattling in the pocket of a giant, a young count had crossed over from somewhere east and ruined, too clean and too desperate for the end of the world. He had a name then that made you see velvet and smoke Alexei something. I heard it different every time. His family had been rich in the way that teaches a man he is a fact of nature, and then the wars and the debts turned gravity sideways on him, and he became an animal in a burning barn. He fled wide and north. There were gold rumors blooming like frost flowers. He followed them into rooms filled with stale air and pipe, smoke and men who believed luck had a physical address. He found gold, or it found him. Depending on who told it, he learned how to pull shine from dirt, and the shine was a better drug than any he'd brought across the sea. But the North is patient. It wears you down without raising its voice. The Count spent his youth at the bottom of holes and his nights in a bar, where everything tasted like someone else's hunger. And one night, when the walls tapped their fingers and the oil lamp turned them all the color of old teeth, a traveler walked in out of a wind that hadn't yet been given a name. The traveler was thin the way stories are thin. You could see straight through him to the ending. If you had better eyes than anyone in that room, he sat with the Count and didn't order anything, and the two of them talked in the low mathematics of men who have both stopped believing in fairness. The bartender was certain that the traveler spoke a language that wasn't a language at all, felt more like a place, while the Count answered in Russian, and then in English, and then at last with the high, small sounds of laughter. A coin changed hands. Coin is a generous word. It was a disc the size of a button, black as river ice when the sky forgets it is supposed to reflect anything. The traveler told him the rules in that language that wasn't one. The Count pricked his thumb, the coin drank, and the lamp went out without smoke, which was wrong. In the morning the Count went to the river and didn't see his face. By that afternoon his fever broke, and when the men at the claim came back from warming their hands, he was still working, hands steady, eyes bright and foolish as new money. He aged after that the way names do. He kept his shape for a long time, and then, maybe, turned into something softer. And then he was just a story told by a lamp. He'd built that manor on the ridge with gold. That was too heavy for a human life to carry. He'd bought man and silence, and then he learned to hunt the way winter hunts. He picked the nights when the river forgot how to speak, the weeks when the sun was something you remembered from your mother's voice. He took the drunks first, which felt almost merciful, and then the ones who had no one to stand up and make the story go still. Every few decades he paid a man somewhere to declare the house abandoned and sell it to a new name with the same handwriting. You believe any of that? I asked Cal when he finished. He didn't smile. "Belief's expensive," he said. "I rent. But I've seen his eyes in a snow squall, and I've watched ravens follow him uphill like they were waiting for the wind." To do arithmetic, the black days settled. The town turned into a handful of lit windows, arranged to look like resistance. The river roared low and slow under new ice, and no one had to tell you to move quickly between places. We all wore headlamps when we went out, and we all walked with the quiet that winter rewards. After the second week, a man from the cabins east of the airstrip didn't show up for coffee. No one said his name at first. Names make things hard and real. We looked in the usual places. The wind erased our search as we made it. After a while, you call it weather. After a while, you call it the North being the North. After a while, you say his name, because you owe a debt to the things that would have your name said if you went missing. On the 10th night without him, I was walking back from the generator. The manor on the ridge was a blacker shape against black. My headlamp caught something at the edge of the tree's eyes. I thought a dog or a fox, but they didn't reflect gold or green. They reflected nothing, like pits with a logic. They withdrew, soundless as fog. I told myself what a city man would tell himself. I told myself what someone who has not yet paid the cost of belief would say. I went inside and sat with my back against the door without knowing. I'd chosen that position. Then June arrived. She came in on a plane that shouldn't have flown with weather like that, wearing the tired, invincible posture of a ranger from downriver who had been sent because someone in an office had a rule to follow. We all knew she wouldn't be able to leave until the wind lost interest again. She asked questions with care. She wrote names and dates in a notebook that had been wet a dozen times and dried under a dozen stoves. When she asked about the manor, we did the slow shrug that meant, "We are not saying no. We are saying you should be the one to say yes first." "I want to meet him," June said. "You don't," Elsie told her. "I didn't say I want to. I said I want to know." So we hiked the ridge at noon when the light, such as it was, made shadows thicker. The wind was an honest thing that day. It told us we were fools and then tried to make it true. The manor looked like a ship that had been sailed above the tree line by someone who forgot to get out. Shutters nailed tight, glass dark, a bell that had no rope. June knocked anyway, because being told no by a building isn't the same as being told no by a person. He opened the door with a speed that made the wind stumble over itself. He looked like he had in the bar-layered civil, smooth with the kind of distance money buys when it remembers you. "Ranger," he said, as if he'd been practicing the title for the pleasure of it. "Please come in out of this." The foyer was warm in the way a church's warm heat rearranged to mimic grace. The air smelled faintly of cedar and something like clove, with an undernote that made my stomach think of iron. He led us into a room lined with books that looked very much like they had been put there for walls, not reading. The lamps were shaded, the light amber and obedient. "We're missing a man," June said, simple and hard. "That happens," he said. "Alaska is a very large animal. Sometimes it eats." "You see anything?" she asked. "Only what this weather permits," he said, and smiled once at the precision of his own rhetoric. I am very sorry for your loss. We haven't declared a loss, she said. Wise, he said. Delay keeps grief from feeling too much like a debt. She studied him the way I'd seen her study tracks. Can we look around? She asked. Of course, he said. I will accompany you. The house is old. She trips strangers. We walked and the house behaved. The hallways went where hallways should. The rooms had the furniture you expected. The windows looked out on the edge of the world, with the modesty of framed photographs. No chains, no stains, no wrong notes. In the back hall, a door was locked not ostentatiously, not pointedly, just as if it had always been that way. June glanced at it. He met her glance with equal weight. Crawl space, he said. Nothing to see. He did not offer a key. Outside again, June pulled her scarf up and her doubt in tighter. He's wrong, she said. Wrong how? As in the math doesn't work. The square footage of that place doesn't match the windows. The air inside the back half smelled like cold metal, and he never blinked when the wind hit him in the face. We waited until the white nights came back. That was the plan we'd built out of superstition and story. You confront a thing made for darkness with as much light as you can. In summer, the ridge loses its knife's edge, and the manor sits in a soft bowl of light that flattens everyone's sense of time. We thought that would help us. We thought a lot of things that turned out to be useful only because we believed them. By then, another man was gone. The first could be weather. The second was a policy. People stopped moving alone after dark. Cal started carrying a flare gun like a prayer. Elsie kept the neon on even when the generator coughed. The ravens multiplied. They watched the ridge with a scandalous, greedy concentration, as if the house had promised them a favor. The day we chose was the day. The clouds shaved their heads, and the sun smeared itself across the horizon and refused to pick a side. June, Cal, and I hiked up with packs that clinked when we walked. Not weapons, not exactly salt mirrors, a coil of heavy rope, 3 flares, a hammer, a crowbar, a small sledge, and a Bible Cal had inherited from a man who never inherited anything. There are ways to make yourself feel like a story can't have you unless it asks nicely. He opened the door before we knocked. Tourists, he said, but without the smile. We wanted to see the crawl space, June said, the notebook in her pocket like a badge. Of course, he said, and this time he did produce a key. It gleamed without apology. The lock accepted it like a fact, returning to its definition. The door didn't lead to a crawl space. It led to stairs, old stone, with the kind of wear a century puts on them when the feet are patient. The air came up at us in a cool wave that tasted like coins. He went first, which made us feel safer and more foolish. He rested his hand on the rail the way a man rests his hand on a shoulder he owns. I could tell you what we found there, and it would sound like something you've heard because fear is efficient and uses the same. Tools everywhere. There were rooms with walls that were too smooth for geology and too old for drywall. Alcoves with objects that were almost but not quite ceremonial. Shelves with jars that held things no good recipe would ask for. But what mattered was the center room, a circle with a floor of old river stones and a table. That wasn't a table in the way a stage isn't a floor. On it lay books bound in a leather that was too thick to have come from. Anything we were willing to name, and ledgers kept in a precise hand that spanned decades without getting older. Names, dates, amounts, times of moonrise, and river height. The seasons counted in a column that started with the word white and ended with black, over and over and over. Accounting, Warren said. I told you. I keep to habits. Whose names? June asked, though I could feel the answer under my tongue like a splinter. Debtors, he said softly. Benefactors, guests. Cal stepped forward, and his big hands read the paper like it was a language he could break. He stopped at a name that made his mouth open. He didn't say it. He just looked up, and in his look was grief arranged as a plan. You'll put that down, Warren said, and he wasn't threatening. He was instructing the world to remember how to behave. We'll take the book, June said, and you'll come with us. He laughed once. It was a pleasant sound that made my teeth want to move. You've brought mirrors, he said, and salt, and the comfort of paper. You think this is a fairy tale. It is not. It is an agreement. With what? June asked. With someone who keeps their promises, he said simply, more reliably than any government and more intimately than any god. Cal moved before his mind caught up. He swung the sledge the way a man swings at an animal in a trap, with anger designed to look like mercy. The sledge hit the ledger, and the room made a sound that belonged under mountains. The book didn't move. The sledge bounced. Cal's hands split. He didn't cry out because he had already decided not to. Warren did something small with his face, and the room understood it. The lamp flames turned to needles. The hair on my arms tried to climb to higher ground. He stepped toward Cal, and the air stepped with him. There are people who carry night around inside them. He was the first I had met who wore it like a tailored coat. I got the flare out and fumbled the cap off with the stubborn, idiot hope of someone trying to apply a rule to a story that had never agreed to be bound by rules. June raised the mirror, and the mirror did. What mirrors do when you ask too much. It broke too fast to be dramatic. Salt hissed on stone. The smell in the room swung from iron to something old and sweet. You can't, Warren said gently, to no one and to all of us. You can't have this place forever, June said, voice steady. You can't have these people. I do not have them, he said. I attended to them. I fired the flare. It lanced the air, white and rude and made for outside. It hit him in the shoulder and guttered there like an insult. He looked at it. He looked bored. Then he was closer, and June was on the floor without the physics that gets you there. And Cal had the sledge up, again because he was an honest man who believed in repetition. What saves you sometimes is not bravery. It's the stupid architecture of luck. The second flare tipped out of my pocket as he turned toward Cal, rolled under the table, and cracked under its own thin patience. It went off against the underside of the stone, and light poured up like something escaped from a place that never had doors. For a second, for long enough to be a second, and not a miracle. Warren stepped away from himself. The human that clothed him bent under a weight. His outline shook. The air forgot his rights. His shadow didn't know where to stand. Now, June said, and she meant everything at once. Cal's sledge found the ledger again. and this time the sound belonged to breaking. The ledger split along the spine, not like a book, but like a thing that had learned to pretend to be one. Pages lifted. Names flew and turned into dust fine enough to be snow. Warden made a sound that wasn't a human sound, and yet made you want to comfort him, because it was the sound of someone losing a contract they had counted on for longer than roofs have been a fact. He moved toward me, and in his face I saw the hunger of the winter river, when it can't be bothered to put a lid on itself. Then the white knight did what we had paid for it to do without knowing the cost. Light slid down the stairwell through a vent I hadn't seen, fell in a plank across the floor, and cut through him the way a ball cuts through habit. He stepped back again, graceful even then, and the edge of the light sliced. Clean through his coat, the cloth smoked without heat. The skin beneath it exposed itself as something that had never taken an oath to be skin. "Up," June said, and she was pulling me and cursing, and bleeding without argument from the facts of her body. Cal came after us, carrying nothing, having decided to save his hands for a different day. We reached the foyer, and then the door, and then the white that isn't white so much as the idea of day made visible. Behind us, the house made new noises. Not the Hollywood ones, no violins, no thunder, just the quiet, administrative collapse of a set of agreements being renegotiated all at once. The bell without a rope rang once gently, like someone saying the end of a prayer under their breath. Outside, the ravens went hysterical. The ridge hummed. The river below lifted its voice, and I thought for a wild instant that it was pleased. We didn't go back that day. We stood in the light and breathed, and when breathing felt less like borrowing, we crawled down the ridge on knees we'd pretended we didn't need. In Eagle's Rest, we told Elsie a story without nouns. She poured us something brown and old. We drank it without asking. That night, nobody slept, because you don't pry a nail out of a house and then trust the roof. The next morning, Cal and I hiked up with shovels and the kind of resolve that is less courage than refusal. The manor was there. The door was closed, as if it had never taken a breath. Inside, the walls had moved. The stairwell yawned where the kitchen had been. Light fell down into places it hadn't been allowed to go. The ledger room was still and changed. On the table lay the coin, small and black, and not reflecting anything. "Don't," I said, and Cal laughed without sound and didn't. We carried what we could out. We piled furniture and paper and rugs, and the pretense of a life in the yard. June poured a thin river of diesel and drew a path with a match. Flames went up slow, thinking, surprised to discover themselves doing this. We stood with our backs to the light that never ended and watched the house end the way. A long sentence ends when someone finally remembers they should have used a period a decade ago. When the roof fell, something inside made a sound like relief. When the ridge threw a column of smoke high enough to make the ravens complain, the coin popped once on the table like a cartoon eye and went still. We waited for it to melt. It didn't. We waited for him to step out of the smoke, hat in hand, a gentleman arriving late to his own demise. He didn't. The fire burned until the river got bored and set, up a draft to bully it into ash. We buried the coin in the silt at the edge of the water while the White Knight looked away and pretended not to notice. We salted the place where it sank, because our stories all agreed on salt, if not on anything else. We left and walked down with the easy lies you tell your sore legs, that the hill is flatter than it looks, that what needs to be done has been done. No one else went missing that summer. The ravens returned to counting things that had no weight. The river ran lower and then higher, and then forgot us the way the best places do. In the fall, June left with a notebook thick enough to hold a winter together. Cal's hands healed into new maps. I ran freight and learned that grief and relief use the same muscles if you hold them long enough. In the deep winter that came after, on a black day when the world had settled like a dog over its own paws, I went to the river alone because I am not always wise. I walked to the bend where we'd buried the coin. The ice was new clear enough to show you the river's face if you wanted to see it. I wanted to and didn't, so I compromised and looked sideways into the water. There was nothing there but river. No glint, no black. No coin sitting foolishly in a bed of silt. I told myself ice moves. Silt shifts. Water keeps accounts we don't get to audit. Then I stood too long, and the cold reminded me that curiosity isn't a blanket. I turned back toward the lights of Eagle's Rest, which had been arranged into a shape that felt like resistance or home, depending on the hour. In the bar, Elsie was fixing the neon again, coaxing a new letter into breathing. She looked up when I came in and put a glass down for me without asking. "You've got that face," she said. "What face?" "The one that means you went to the river to ask a question, and the river told you to mind your own business." "I thought we ended it," I said, and the words went out into the room and came back with snow on them. Elsie nodded, like someone agreeing with a child about gravity. "We ended what we could. He made a bargain a long time ago with something that knows how to keep time. Maybe we broke the ledger. Maybe we burned the house. But if the contract was anchored somewhere colder, somewhere older, well, white nights don't last. Neither do black days." "It isn't over," I said. "It's never over," she said gently. "It's just our turn." Cal came in, then, head dusted with frost, eyes bright with a kind of happiness you get only from surviving, something by a margin small enough to matter. June sent a postcard that spring with a picture of a town that had too many trees to be ours. On the back, she had written, "I think about accounting a lot lately. I think about who keeps the books for places like ours. I think about where we owe and where we are owed. Stay warm." When summer came back, we went up to the ridge and saw that the foundations had not learned from the fire. They still believed in standing. Wildflowers piled themselves against stone and made an argument for softness. I did not know how to answer. The ravens watched us and decided, for the moment, not to hold court. New people came to Eagle's Rest and did that old math, how far from the road, how near to a place they could pretend they'd been born for. They asked about winters, and we told them the truth. They asked about the house, and we told them it burned and that it might someday not be finished with us. Some of them laughed. Some of them wrote down the name Warren and asked if it was a first name or a last. I told them it was the one he was using and watched them put it away like a tool they hoped never to need. Sometimes in the long gold hours that don't end, I think about the night he made his bargain. I imagine the bar and the breath and the coin and a man whose family had taught him the wrong lessons about what lasts. I imagine his hands, young then, struck with the fever of a miner and the fever of a noble gone to seed. I imagine the traveler, thin and patient as hunger. I imagine that if either of them had chosen differently, the ridge would have had a different name, and a dozen men would have had a dozen winters to waste and love and complain about. But they did not. They did what stories do. They found each other in the middle of a room and agreed not to end. When the wind cuts down from the mountains and the river lifts itself like a snake, I step inside and bolt the door and check the window that doesn't like to stay closed. I put my back against wood and listen to the generator talk to itself. I tell myself the truth. The white nights belong to the white nights. The black days belong to the black days. And the manor on the ridge belongs to the part of me that will always go still when I hear a footstep on a stair that shouldn't be there. If you come north, bring a good coat and learn the names of the months as this place teaches them. Learn how to move and how to stop. Learn how to count without a ledger. We don't talk much about counts anymore, but we count each other, and that up here is what passes for a cure.